Okay, artists, time to draw observationally. Now, there's two things we want to focus on for this particular exercise, two challenges. If you can get these under your belt, if they can become second nature, all drawings moving forward, no matter how complex they get, will get a little easier. All right? So what we want to do first is to draw out our egg. And we want to bear this in mind when we do it. It is very simple to fall back onto this old trope, a pitfall for artists. When asked to draw something in front of them, they'll look at it once, they'll recognize it, then they'll scarcely look at it again, maybe look up occasionally, but really they're working off of an internal database. If they were, for example, drawing an apple, they might look up, recognize, oh, apples, I know what those look like, and then start drawing from memory. And they've seen them in cartoons, they've seen them on the walls of their classroom when they were in grade school. They have a lot of cliche images of apples. They can make a symbol of an apple. In other words, something that any outside observer would recognize as an apple. But in truth, the apple in front of them might not be so symmetrical or so ideal. It might not be what you'd expect to see with an apple. Right? And the goal here is to ensure that you always draw what you see and not what you'd prefer to be seeing. Because that is the difference between somebody who can draw accurately and somebody who simply creates symbols of the objects in front of them. Okay? So if we're going to try to break down this egg and cup in front of us, we're going to want to reach for a fairly light pencil because, like with all things in nature, we don't have the cartoonish outlines we've come to expect from cartoons. So, let's see here. To keep it light, I'm going to reach for an H pencil. The 2H is a little harder than, say, an HB or a B pencil, and so even if I apply a little more pressure on accident, I can keep it fairly light. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I want to make use of my space on the page. The smaller I make it, the harder it's going to be to accurately capture it and to include all that value. So I'm going to make certain that I'm drawing at a decent enough scale. And I'm going to start with the egg. Now, I'm spending the majority of the time sketching looking not at the paper, but at the object I'm referencing. And the reason for that is because even eggs exist in that internal database within our mind. Like, we can draw a bunch of eggs, but when we rush, it might look like this. We might make it too circular. It might become too pill-shaped or oval, and that simply won't do. Like, when I'm drawing the egg I'm seeing in front of me, it might be a little more pointed towards the top than your average egg. It might be a little more swollen. It might actually be tipped slightly to the side. This one is ever so slightly tipped to the right, and that's important to note. But I'm starting with the shape of the egg because the cup it's resting in fits around it, right? It conforms to the size and the shape of the egg's form, not the other way around. So next, I'm going to draw the cup, and I'm even going to ask myself, well, how far does the lip rise up on that egg? And it looks to be about just below the halfway mark. And next, I'm going to draw the lip. And notice how, while I observe it and sketch, I'm recognizing that it dips down a bit. Starts here, dips down. There's a bit of a curve to it. All right? Now, what I want to avoid is oversimplification, because again, the goal is drawing what you see, not what you'd prefer to see. And sometimes that's inconvenient, but it's accurate. So here, I'll have a lot of artists who routinely do this. That's how they draw the cup beneath it, which of course is not what they're seeing. It might expedite it. It might make it easier for them to tackle, but this is a very common, again, pitfall that you want to avoid. When we're faced with something we're not used to drawing or something that we have little confidence in, we feel like we're not going to draw it well, people tend to round down. They simplify it, and that's not always intentional. They're looking at something, it's challenging, and so their brain, trying to make sense of it, thinks like, well, here's a solution. And it's not necessarily the correct one, but they do it, they jump at it, and all of a sudden now they've got a porcelain cup that is skin tight to that egg. Almost like the egg is wearing a thong, right? But we do not want to do that. When we look at it, we can see that it curves a little. It's not perfectly straight, because that would only be possible if we were at eye level with it, which would mean if our cup was resting on the table, our eyes had to be where our belly button is. It had to be in line with the table, right? So instead, we get that curve, and then we recognize, oh, there's a bit of width to it. That lip comes out a bit, which only makes sense, right? This would be impossible. It's skin tight. You need to stretch like latex around that thing. So instead, let's create that lip. Again, very lightly so that we can correct mistakes if we got them. And as we shade, we can hide those outlines because we don't want them left over. Now, unlike this right here, again, another mistake, we can see that the cup, it adds some height to that egg. The cup, well, when the egg rests in it, it must like stop about, it must hang above the interior of the cup in some way, because that's otherwise a really elongated egg. So recognizing that, we're gonna bring the cup down. We're basically breaking this down to just simple shapes, right? Linking them together. And then as we draw it, with each line that we put down, we're comparing it to the last one we put down. So that way we know that everything relates to each other correctly. How wide is the lip in comparison to the egg, right? How wide is the cup? How tall is it in comparison to the height of the egg? Now for the base, well, it looks like the base is almost two. It looks like the cup is actually almost maybe two of those bases tall. So let's bring that base down about half, right about there. Yes, we're even trying to compare this base shape to the shapes we've already laid down because they relate to each other. We want them to relate to each other correctly. Now, how to know how wide it comes out? Well, when I look at this, again, I'm doing comparisons for all the things I've already drawn. If I run a vertical line up from the left and rightmost part of the bases, I notice that those lines, well, they're in line with the lip. So I'm going to bring it out to meet that sort of invisible, helpful guideline. And when I'm doing the bottom of the base, I'm noticing it curves parallel with the lip, that mouth, right? Is that in line? It is. There we go. So as I draw, it's crucial that I do not work from memory, no matter how familiar the object might be. It could be my sister's face, it could be a tabletop, it could be a picture I see on the wall every day when I get out of bed. But if I was asked to draw it, that doesn't mean I'm spending 90% of the time looking at this piece of paper, drawing it from memory. I'm going to make certain I'm drawing it from reference, and I'm looking up constantly and comparing each line I put down with the lines before it. Because I might recognize, oh, that lip comes down a little too drastically, which it does. At the very end, I'm going to police myself and see if there are any opportunities to make improvements and increase the accuracy before I move on. Because once I'm done with the light line work, I'm going to start shading, and that's when things will get a little more permanent. So it helps to police myself first. and make any corrections, fix glaring omissions right before moving on. Now that is far more accurate. Now I'm going to be ready to shade. If you want a little help with that after getting started, stick around and check out video number 2. Thanks. You got this.